Hi, Pete Moore Gun Mart TV, and this is not a double gun test, far from it. I started shooting iron sights like most people my age with air guns, because scopes, though they existed, could never afford one and they were pretty crappy anyway. And I shot my way through rats and things like that in the back garden. And you learn how to use an iron sight rifle. My interest these days, apart from just using irons, is hunting with iron sights. I've had a go at it and it is really quite exciting. A number of issues to consider. First of all is distance, we'll come to that, but basically iron sights are not anything like telescopic sights. I talk about the basic types of iron sight, not the aperture ones used by the target rifle people. It's a very basic setup. You have a U-notch at the rear or a V-notch at the rear of the gun, and up front you have a blade. The two rifles I've picked for the test are probably at least 100 years apart in technology. First is my all-time favourite lever action and one of the prides of my collection. It's a Winchester 1895. Teddy Roosevelt had a pair of these in 405 Winchesters which he took to Africa on his grand safari. These sight-wise, as we shall see in a minute, about as basic as you can get. This is Browning's Morale straight pull. This one is scope equipped, it has a scope base on it, and I can put a red dot on this, which is almost like a very sort of high-tech form of iron sight or a scope. However, what it has is Batu sights, as we shall see. But they operate the same principle of a rear U-notch or V-notch and a blade up front. You have something called an elevator wedge. In this case it's semi-buckhorn. As you can see, the wings of the U-notch plate come up around the U-notch itself. This long thing here is a piece of sprung steel. It's a one piece with the U-notch at the back. And that is a wedge. So what you do, you lift that up a little bit, just take the tension off it, and you can move the wedge backwards and forwards. The more you move the wedge backwards, the more height it gains, therefore it pushes the sight up. Up front, again, you couldn't miss it if you tried, is a very large blade with a little brass tip on it. So it's quite fine, but it's got a big lump. And that is set in a dovetail, as is the rear. So basically, on this rifle, you cannot adjust for range on the front sight, but you can adjust for windage, and you knock the sight left and right. If the gun is shooting right, you knock the sight right, which makes you swing the gun around the rear sight left to get back on. The rear one is for windage as well. You can knock it left and right, but here the reverse is true, because you must remember that any iron sight rifle pivots around its rear sight. And that's all there is to it. They can be a bit awkward to set up because someone's cut the notches, and if you don't get it right, then you can be shooting high or low, and the only recourse is to file the notches. Okay, let's move on to the Morale. This has what they call a Batu rib. Normally you'd see a gun like this, it'll just have like a sort of a fold down, fold up U-notch. But here you've got this white line which it's for quick reaction in sort of dark situations. Your eye just picks up the line and you point the gun very naturally. Rear is a fixed U-notch with green day-glow dots either side. It just takes the light in, and so you can see what's happening with it. Up front, everything's done up front in terms of adjustment on this rifle. Again, you have a red day-glow bar in there. If you look very carefully at the top, there's a little recessed socket-headed screw, and you wind that up and down, which moves the blade up and down. The higher the blade is, the more depression you get, and the lower the blade is, the more elevation. As I said before, as the gun pivots around its rear sight, you move the muzzle up or down accordingly to align the rear sight. But it also has windage as well. That hole at the front, again, is another grub screw in there. If you look very closely, you can see a white line and three like witness lines. What you do, you slack off the front screw, and you can move that whole block with the red line on everything left and right, and then you can adjust for windage and elevation. One thing I would say, though you may not think it true, is that corrections on iron sights need to be very, very small, because you'd be surprised. You move it a millimetre and that can knock the group out to 3 or 4 inches sometimes. So all iron sights of this nature, which I call hunting iron sights or basic iron sights, are like this. So they're not target rifle sights, they're not military sights. So that's what you've got to work with. If you're thinking of hunting with iron sights, calibre is king. I wouldn't use smaller calibers like 243, stuff like that. 6.5, 7mm, 30 caliber, that sort of thing. Given the fact that you can't aim and shoot as well as a scope rifle, then you do need to thump them down a bit. And some cartridges just don't quite have it in terms of not with a precise point of impact. These two are both in one of my favourite calibers, and that is 30-06 Springfield. This is the Norma Oryx bonded 165 grain. Not heavy for a 30-06, but it's probably 30-06s and other things like 8x57, which is another good caliber for iron sights, is that the heavier weights go up to 200 grains plus, and the guns become very thumpy to shoot because there's no extra weight on them. 165, 170 strikes a good balance between effectiveness and shooter comfort. I've been zeroing these two with the Norma today, and I've managed to get through nearly 30 rounds doing it. I had some problems, certainly over adjusting the morale, so it's a matter of having a good supply. And I've put some orange clay pigeon down a range at 100 yards, which I think is really the effective range for iron sights if you think you're good enough. And that's the thing, too excited about it, you've got to be very clinical. It's okay, go out there, shoot off 6, shoot from a high seat, put up deer-sized targets so you can see what you're hitting, because you owe it to the deer to be able to put the bullet in the right place. And that's not hard, but range is the issue. Now, a few words on the sight picture. If you're used to shooting a scope rifle, then what you see is your circular view with your crosshair and nothing obstructing the target. Not so with iron sights. If we look at the 1895, the size of the semi-buckhorn rear plate, you can see what you want to shoot, but because the horns come up round it, you can't see anything else. So that's what I said about making a shot on a deer where you need to know where everything is in relation to the body. It's not quite so easy. So you come up, yes, you can see the deer, and then you can see the mass of its body, but unless there's no relation, if you can't see a leg or anything, then to a degree you're guessing. The morale with its day-glow sights partly helps that out, as they're much smaller, so you tend to see a lot more around them. Also, you have the red-green, and in the light, these glow really quite bright, so line up is quite easy, and that's the trick. Lining up is really what it's all about. So just think on that, and say again, practice, see what you can see what you can't see. Speaking of calibre, a colleague of mine, Canadian guy, took me hunting years ago when I was in Canada, and he used to hunt deer with a 45-70 trapdoor Springfield cavalry carbine, the one Custody used at the last stand. It was a black powder gun, original, fired a 405 grain flat nose lead bullet, and we were out shooting mule deer. Well, I wasn't shooting, I was just watching the guy, and they have reasonably primitive sights. And he thumped this thing about 60 yards, I think, and I said, what do you do? He says, well, basically, I aim for the engine room, you know, heart and lung sort of thing, and you've got a 405 grain bullet. It's only doing about maybe 1,200 feet per second, but they really do knock them down. And that's, again, emphasising about calibre-wise. He just said he keeps the ranges short, and he knows the 45-70 can stop anything pretty much, and that's why he likes to use it. So you choose what calibers you want, but think on it.